Hi, and welcome to the Embouchure Project podcast, where we bring together the finest minds in the world to help understand the complex system that is the embouchure. The Embouchure Project represents a network of neurologists, scientists, physical therapists, psychologists, and pedagogues. The goal is to help define what a healthy embouchure is, what we can do to optimize the embouchure, and to deal with problems as they arise. A lot of our time will be devoted to embouchure dysfunction, from minor annoyances to debilitating forms of dystonia. We hope that all players, teachers and medical professionals will find this to be a rich resource. My name is Frankie Lacerdo. I'm a horn player with the West Australian Symphony Orchestra, founder of Brass Rehab, and on faculty as a teacher at the University of Western Australia. Thank you for joining us. We hope you find this to be informative and helpful. The Embouchure Project would like to thank the Australian Society of Performing Arts Healthcare and the Glenn Gould School for their support. Today we welcome legendary teacher and horn player Gail WIlliams. She began her career in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra in 1978 and stayed there until 1998, when she became professor of horn at the Northwestern University. She continues to play and teach around the world. She's known for her kindness, wisdom and honesty. She'll modestly tell you that she teaches the same thing over and over, but those who have been lucky enough to study with her know that you will never get to the bottom of her depth of understanding when it comes to making music beautifully on the horn. We're delighted to have her on the podcast. Please enjoy. Welcome back to the Embouchure Project podcast. My name's Frankie Lacerdo. Hi Gail, it's great to have you here at dinner time.
It's wonderful to be here, Frankie. Thank you very much for having me.
What are you up to these days?
Teaching at Northwestern. I technically retired, but I'm still teaching because they didn't open up my cert. So hopefully in another year they will move forward and I can do a little more photography and do some other trips. And maybe do some more teaching elsewhere. You know, who knows what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen down the pipe. And that's why we're having this conversation.
That's right.
Yeah.
I hope you never stop teaching, but I know we need to have another life, don't we, as musicians?
Yeah. I mean, I have to say that I really love the interaction of having different people in my studio come through. I had a really fun time this afternoon because a bass trombonist came in and played for me. And it was just really fun, you know. Not only is it repertoire, I do hear it quite often next door with Mulcahy, a studio next door to mine. So I hear those excerpts. But, you know, it's just a little different thought process.
Yeah. So, as you know, the Embouchure Project and this podcast is about, the name suggests, about embouchures, but obviously we're talking all the time about the whole system, about everything. And I want to dive straight in with you and just ask about the relationship with the embouchure, but also the air, the right way to use air, because the embouchure is nothing without air. So I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about the relationship between the two and how you teach it, visualize it,
That's a loaded question. I think it has to be balanced. One doesn't work without the other. And I feel pretty strongly that if your air isn't efficient and it's got some, I was just trying to talk about this with a student today. You have to have some kind of energy. And I try never to use the word support.
Okay.
Because Mr. Jacobs would just say, don't use that word because they'll start holding. So people, support means they're going to hold something. Well, you can't hold up air. It's weightless. But you can blow. So I talk about the energy in the blow because you can see a piece of paper move or blow against a window or something like that. So blow a candle out. Do you see anything moving besides your lungs? Because you can't see your lungs, but you can feel your lungs. And I mean, Jacobs was very, very important in my study. Probably started taking lessons almost 50 years ago with him. Not quite, but pretty close. And I had a wonderful teacher who, when I would start to ask questions, Mr. Covert would say, Gail, just blow. Just don't think. Just play.
Yeah.
But when I started teaching, I asked him things and he said, well, you got to think about it. I said, oh, but you told me not to think, And so it comes full circle and you have to figure out something. And I think we all have our own technique and ways of describing it. And for me, you have to have balance, like a great tennis player. And I watch a lot of tennis. You have to have that footwork, which is important. You have to have the really great swing. You have to know when you're going to grab that racket. And that's when your lips go together. And then you hit the ball and you follow through with your air. It's all kind of the same. And you might think of different speeds of the ball coming off the racket, or different spins, and that'll make different colors for you. But I feel strongly that it's a real artistic adventure that we're on, but we also have to be kind of knowledgeable about the athleticism that we have to have. And it's not just buzz and blow. It's not just that. You do have to know a little bit more than that.
Yeah, so like tennis players know what muscles they're using or what's going on or more about their posture. Yeah.
Right.
So I wonder if I'm trying to put myself in, like a 13-year-old horn player's view, and if they came to you and they just weren't playing with that energy, or you could see clearly that they weren't playing with enough air pressure, or how would you go about translating to them how to do that physically, or how to blow the candle, or how to...
I might take a dollar bill and hold it out in front of them and have them make it move. And then maybe put it on the wall and see if they can keep it there, and they might get able to keep the dollar bill. I did that with my 9-year-old grandson, just to experiment. I said, can you keep that there by blowing? And I didn't tell him he had to, what he had to do. He just blew. He just blew.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I think that's really better for a young kid.
Yeah.
As you get older, you do have to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So
I like that. Like the KISS rule, keep it simple, stupid.
That's correct. Yeah. But after a while, you have to know what you're doing. So, I mean, it does come down to, in my teaching in my studio, I think probably a third of the time I'm saying, play it on your mouthpiece. Can you hear what you're doing? Because your mouthpiece sound will give you a tool to see if you're blocking the air with your tongue, if you have, if it's too spread, if it's too pinched. And I always tell the story, and the kids go, oh no, here she goes with another story. But the first time I ever played extra with the Chicago Symphony, I was walking down that long hall, which is not the way it is anymore, but I was walking down that hall, rather nervous, and this buzz was behind me. I mean, it was like loud. It was intense. It was it was gorgeous. And I took a quick little peek around to see who it was, and who was it? It was Bud Herseth, who had the most vibrant brass sound anyone could ever hear. And it was because he didn't have any tension in his body. Just blowing. So I try to use that example of the air has to have energy, but if it's got tension, it dies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
But
I
it's
think
tricky,
that's
isn't
where
it?
things get awry when you add tension. And then this gets tense. I never had an opportunity to ask Mr. Jacobs before he left the world that if you tense this too hard, does it go down here? And if you tense your gut too hard, does it go up here? Well, yeah, it does.
Mm.
You know, we
Yeah.
can all
Yeah.
demonstrate it. And
Yeah.
so to have the energy of that blow, I mean, guess that's kind of how it comes out of the pipe. I just call it a pipe. I don't want anybody
Yeah.
thinking applause.
Yeah. And
That
I've heard. Yeah. I just wonder, like, with that blow, like talking about, we dig quite deep into the anatomical part of what's happening, and because language is such a subjective thing. If you say just blow, it can mean different things for different people, and my worry is that some people will be doing the wrong thing to achieve that
right.
goal. But I really like this idea of energy as opposed to
Around Thanksgiving time here in the States, we always baste our turkeys. And
yeah.
it always reminds me of the turkey baster. There's this long, skinny, right? And it has a great big bulb.
Yep.
And then if you put lips on the end of it, it would go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Or, and I was talking to a student the other day, and I said, well, it's like a bellows. You know, the bellows has little lungs, and they look at you like, huh? And so you describe what a bellows does, and then you have the energy from the handles that you have to go some kind of energy to get the air to go out the lungs of the bellows, and then it has this nozzle.
Yep.
So you can
Yeah.
put little plastic lips on there, and that could be a buzz. You know,
Yeah.
that to just get them to kind of smile at themselves and realize it's not that difficult. You just have to make it more simple to get the air in and get the air out.
Yeah. Yeah. So when on that, so what are you thinking about when you play? What are you thinking about for inhalation and exhalation? So let's say for your inhalation, what are you thinking about?
Hoe backwards.
Right. Super simple.
This is not tense, because if this is tense, then you're not getting any rest. You're not getting any rest. But if you can go, Jake always had me going. Just
And that affects the back of
rushing
the
up
tongue.
the sound of the air past your lips.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
suck that air past. He would say to me over and over, suck that air in, underneath the lip. You know, and I'd kind of look at him like, oh, then I'd watch him, you know. And because I had the wonderful opportunity to sit there and watch him play for 20 years, not quite 20 years, but for many years, and watch him breathe. There wasn't a big effort to get the air in. You just had to turn the energy around.
Yeah. What kind of things was he doing before concerts? Did you get a chance to see kind of his pre-concert routine? And
no, I didn't. No, I actually didn't. He was always he must have warmed up in his studio down the street.
Sure.
For practice down there. I was always underneath the stage with Eddie Kleinhammer and Norman Schwarker and Tim Kent. The four of us, we had our spots underneath the stage, and we all had our warm-ups. And we all
have our spots. Yeah.
You know, and I would always start with a mouthpiece buzz. And Tim Kent, who was sitting in another place, he would go, yeah, buzz, buzz, buzz. You know? So that was his thing. But interesting enough, Eddie Kleinhammer, who played for, 44 or 5 years or something, he always had a plastic tube.
Mm.
Have you heard about this?
Yeah. I've seen tuba players like it's a gold cross on their chest.
Yeah, but he just had his plastic tube from the hardware store. And he would just practice taking a couple breaths in, spit it out, and play. And that's something Jake used a lot. because if you put a tube in, and it's not a toilet, it's not that big. It's like 3/4 of an inch.
Yeah.
And if you just
plastic Perspex tube.
yeah, just that long,
Yeah.
And you ask a student, because I did it today actually. You ask a student, well, what kind of air are you getting in? They said, oh, it just goes in. I said, oh, is it tense? No. I said, oh, well, turn that same kind of air around and use that. So they don't compress as much.
Yeah.
So to get them to take in enough of that kind of air using that tube 3 or 4 times and then spit it out and play on that air, they hear the difference.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can roll up a bit of paper as well, can't you?
Yeah.
And do that if you don't have it all around. Yeah.
I like using a small tube about this long.
Yeah.
And put it here. Oh, that becomes part of my hand position. So I 3 breaths in. I don't take it out. I just stick it in the bell.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah, I just got a text from Kate.
Yeah. Onto the embouchure. So in your years and years of teaching, what are the most kind of inefficiencies that you encounter, whether it's someone that's in a lot of trouble or where you can just notice something that's not kind of, that's holding a student back, I guess is the best thing to say. What are the kind of biggest things that you've noticed in your career?
One would be the spread. So this is too thin. Yeah, that's too thin. So their buzz is very thin.
Yep.
And it's this never gets a chance to rest, for repose, that kind of thing. Interesting enough, I would probably say if you ask most horn players where their worst range is, they'd say second line G down the octave. And why is that? And the only thing I've come up with over the years is, well, that's where you start on the instrument. And then you got better and you went higher and then you went lower and you never went back and fixed that middle register because you didn't think you had to have much of an embouchure. And that's your meat and potatoes. That's your, like,
cash
as
register.
As in Pilates, that would be your core.
Yeah.
And if your core is strong, doesn't mean brute strength strong, but if that core, that middle octave is strong, then the other octaves can just go.
Yeah.
But
it's interesting as well in a lot of the people that we help that have had injuries, it's in that same register that people have, that things start out.
Yeah.
But they can still sometimes play high and they're like, oh, but
Yeah.
I can play high. I must be okay. But anyone can kind of play high if you can squeeze enough and do whatever. But or they can play low. It's kind of just super relaxed. But the middle register doesn't work, and it's confusing because you think it should be the easiest, but exactly like you say, it's actually the hardest. It requires the most balance. Yeah.
And if you go look at a lot of the etudes that we use, it immediately goes kind of high. And and I think that's a big struggle. And I've noticed a couple people that I taught over Zoom, like the freshman class that are graduating now, it was hard to get them turned around when they came back because you can't hear the buzz on Zoom. It just goes away. And if they try to do certain things, they start using tension in the back of their throat. So it was very interesting when they came to school. I went, no, this isn't going to be a nice lesson. This isn't like, I'm glad you're here. We got to fix this because you've been thinking you're doing something and it's actually incorrect.
Yeah.
So
we were talking a bit off camera, but before we started about playing either with too much with a practice mute or in a tiny apartment, and you get used to playing that way, and then all of a sudden you go into the real world and you're like, oh no, I've been playing for a certain acoustic or
I mean, I had a student who basically played in his mother's closet for almost a year. Excuse me, that is nothing. And boy, his sound went from here to here. Just a minute.
Yeah. Sorry?
But when we were then back to teaching in person at Northwestern, we couldn't use our studios. We had to use large rehearsal rooms or recital halls. So I kept saying to everybody, do you understand how lucky you are? Every single lesson is in a big space and you can learn how to fill it up.
Yep.
And the students said, yeah, I wish we could go back to that. I said, well, that's never going to happen. We're going to be back in our studios. But you have to remember you do have to fill it up. And that's, I think, learning how to project your sound. I think that's really a hard thing to learn. So that's when the forcing and the attention comes in. They try to force it.
Yeah. I remember back to watching some of those videos that Gail WIlliams did with a camera in his bell 5 meters away and then at the back of the hall, and that idea of exaggerating, and those were really interesting for me as a student. But you're totally right. Learning how to project. There's only one way to do it.
You would sit right next to him when he was playing. You see.
Yeah. Yeah, you'd have.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it would be a little grit. But I know that I had been in the hall as a student, and you didn't hear that because he was projecting.
Yeah.
And I think that's another. I don't know. I like the small bell kind of horn, the guard pipe, for that reason, because it can stay a little more compact and then it grows as it goes out in the hall. And some students just really they want to have this mushy gushy sound right next to them. And I said, but that's not going to carry. Sorry, the trombones are going to bury.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they don't like that. But until you can make them be convinced to hear from afar, the amount of articulation you need to have. Not that you have to stop the notes, you have to blow through, but it's like wearing stage makeup. I always say that.
Yeah.
In an opera, you have to show that.
Yeah. So you talked about some students that have like a very spread embouchure. What about if a student comes to you and they just have? So let's talk about what we were just talking about. If their sound is not bright enough, if you know that it doesn't carry, or if it's just too woofy, or how would you go about that? Or what are your concepts about changing sound? Buzzing, yeah, great.
I make them buzz, but I first make them go. What kind of air is it? Is it or is it and direct?
Yep.
And that just that alone helps a lot of students.
Yep.
Just to think, blow, and it doesn't come back at you.
Yeah. Yeah, you get that instant audible feedback of what you're hearing. Yeah.
I do a little lip buzzing. Mr. Jacobs would be mad at me if I said that. But I don't do it high. Yeah. And I'll demonstrate by going. It's out here. It's not down here, and it's not up there. So I think because I'm a grandma, I get to try things out. and I tried it out with my granddaughter the other day, and she's 6, and I have a natural trumpet that's made out of kind of like a plastic kind of, and I just had her buzz on it, and she was starting to match pitches already.
Yeah.
But she wasn't tight.
Yep.
And if you ask most kids, they won't play tight. But somehow, as they've gotten older, I've had a lot of students come in, they go, I'm like, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Because that's too tight.
Yep.
Mike Sachs, principal trumpet in Cleveland, he did a lot of Jimmy Stamp stuff. And I use it all the time. If you play, that's enough energy to play an octave higher on the horn. Is an octave higher, but you don't have to buzz way up there.
Yeah.
It's the air. And I know some people will totally disagree with me, but it's too much tension. It's just too much tension. And you can feel it in the back of your neck if you get too tense.
Yeah.
And that's just not healthy.
Yeah. Yeah, free buzzing is really good in that middle range, isn't it? Because it's the same.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
But Mr. Jacobs was very insistent that you played the entire range on the mouthpiece. So, but matching pitches and playing tunes.
Yeah. So do you do a lot of that in your teaching or just in your personal playing with your free buzzing?
My free buzzing is mine.
Free buzzing,
yeah. I don't do a lot in the students. No. If it's anything, it's just to demonstrate that you have to get your air out here. It can't be down the chin.
Yeah.
Because then you're not using both lips.
Yeah.
The top lip is wrapped over the bottom lip, and I said that bottom lip is necessary for, many different, for your anchor. Yeah.
And I loved a little demonstration you showed me once of getting that lip active, and I've stolen it, and I always credit you, but I've stolen it. But blowing the air down and then and flicking it up to get it to
that
to
actually came from Fred Fox in the Essentials of Brass Playing book. Yeah. And I actually use that today.
Yeah.
I use that in a student today, saying, if you would anchor here a little bit more, and I said, let's just go, and we went down underneath and then brought it out and said, see how much stronger all of a sudden your corners are working, and you don't even have to think about it. That's the way you're built.
Yeah. So Jacobs said, strength is our enemy, weakness is our friend. How do you interpret that?
Well, I actually said it last night in horn class. And I said, and I understand that, because you don't want to have brute strength.
Yeah.
That's tension. But weakness, being a wannabe athlete and having done a lot of stuff, I don't want to be weak, but we all know that if our muscles are tight, they're weak. Period. If you're tight, you're very likely the muscle's really weak. It has to have flexibility. So I had a student doing a plank on the wall. And I said, and it's not a brute strength plank on the floor where your shoulders are going to get involved and you're probably going to shake a little bit because you're not used to it. But just leaning against the wall and going, blowing. Where do you get the blow? Where do you get the energy? That's your strength. That's all the strength you need.
Yeah.
And then they're, of course, some of them were laughing and giggling. I said, well, we could all do it, because I think it's important to know where that strength and energy comes from in your blow, so this doesn't have to get so tight.
Yeah.
And then the minute this gets tight, that you start spreading this way.
Yeah.
Because you can't
use. Is the pelvic floor something that you ever think about or try to?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
And one of the books that I suggest students read, and I use exercises out of it, is by David Neesmith. I don't know if you know that. The Breathing Book for Horn. And he has some wonderful diagrams and pictures in his book. And one of them is the diaphragm and the pelvic floor. And he said that they're a pair. When you take a breath, they go down, and when you exhale, they come up. And I was saying that last night. I said, you keep tension going down, you're just going to put tension right here.
Yeah.
And then tension here.
Yeah.
And that's when all that middle register stuff, it goes away.
Yeah.
I think it's all tied in hand in hand.
Yeah.
The weak area of your playing comes back and haunts you if you don't take care of it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You mentioned fitness, and so it's obviously a big part of your playing. Is it something that you've been convinced about to to tell your students, like that you, because I'm similar to you. I enjoy fitness a lot, and I'm almost on the edge of telling students that you must do some kind of exercise, because it's just mentally, physically, it's just so beneficial. Is this something that you've ever kind of just felt like you have to tell students?
I usually don't have to. I don't tell them.
Yep.
Right away. I guess a lot of my students end up going to some fitness classes.
Yeah.
But I do something like what Don Green, the sports psychologist, did when he was here one time. He had everybody get up and run around.
Mm.
And then take their pulse for 15 seconds. And then do some centering. And of course it lowers. And I said, wouldn't it be nice if you were fit enough that was already that low before you started? Because that's going to be different when you're taking an audition. Walking up those stairs, you're going to be able to go and get lower your heart rate, and it lowers your blood pressure.
Yeah.
And that's just healthy. You know?
Yeah.
A lot of my students do some sort of exercise, or you have to walk when you're in college. You have to walk a bit.
Yeah.
So even just walking. I mean, I don't run anymore because I screwed up my legs and hips by doing marathons. But I walk and I do Pilates, and I think it's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. How have you found yoga, and have you dabbled in any Alexander technique?
A lot. I mean, I started doing Alexander technique. And it's a little bit of a story, but I had a terrible, terrible, terrible headache one day. Pills, it wouldn't go away. And my husband, Larry Combs, was getting ready to play the Copland Concerto with his CSO. And he was studying. He didn't want to sit down and put his clarinet bell between his knees. He wanted to stand up. And I was like, well, that's good, because I should stand up, Yeah. And so he was taking Alexander lessons with Goddard Binkley up here in Wilmette, and he had studied with Alexander. And that day that I had a headache, he said, well, this is what Goddard Binkley did, and he kind of pulled my shoulders out and my headache went away. And I kind of went, So when I was asked to play the Concertstück with Schulte and CSO, I thought, I'm going to do this right. So I contacted John Hennis, my Alexander teacher, who was in town, who played trumpet in the opera. And I had lessons every single week for about, I don't know, from probably about September till May. And I could. And sometimes we'd say, hey, because our kids were the same age, we'd say, hey, let's go play some tennis. And so that would be before Alexander technique lesson. And then another time would be after I have a lesson. And he said, do you know how much more pop you have in the ball? I said, yeah, isn't that fun? So that helped my tennis a lot. It helped my running. And I didn't take my horn in very often. I said, fix me. I will apply that to the horn. And I know, I talk about it every day. And I try to emulate what he does. Most of my students, John Bone, the other horn professor at Northwestern, he's done a lot of Alexander technique. He gets them going even more than I do. But most of my students take Alexander technique lessons. There's a class or a year class. Because I think it's terribly important. It's something you can use for the rest of your life. Not maybe in horn, but whatever you do. Getting out of a chair. But I think it's terribly important for your general health. And then applying that to the horn.
The similarities between running and horn playing. You don't want to be leaning forward when you're running and doing all that stuff. So that shot, and it's exactly the same with horn playing. That idea of stacking and I'm just trying to think of the similarities in.
And then one of my students also, years ago, a fine horn player, but she said, it's not what I want to do. And so she went in and did massage work. But then she started studying with a lady named, and you may not know this name, Judith Aston. And she does Aston patterning. There's different, they're called patiners, And there was a passage in the Schubert octet, and it's not my favorite, and it jumps through act, right? And
No one's favorite.
Oh God, here it comes, And I was in DC, and Amanda came to see me, and I said, yeah, I got this. And, I don't like this passage. She goes, here, play it. And it didn't go well. She goes, well, look, let's do this and this. And she directed me and did a little extra stuff with me. And okay, can you come to the concert tonight? And she made me realize just a few other things that you could add to Alexander technique or whatever. But I think it's terribly important to do something.
Yep.
And whether the Alexander doesn't work for you or something else, there's so many different things you can go out and try. You can do yoga, you can do meditation, you can do, but I think you have to do something.
Yeah.
Life is too short.
Yep. So you're in the Chicago Symphony for 20 years. Is that right? It's 20 years?
Yeah.
20 years. I want to talk about what you would consider like a healthy way of being a professional brass musician. So, or maybe it's something that wasn't generally thought about at that time and is more now, but like what are you teaching your students or your students that have gone on to big careers? Yeah, how do you be a healthy horn player in terms of playing and kind of how you keep your playing up week to week, dodging big programs or just in general? So I think we've touched a bit on yoga or doing something, but what about in your horn health?
You have to do the basics.
Yeah.
You just have to do that. I mean, I was so fortunate to sit in front of and take lessons with Mr. Jacobs and sit next to Mr. Clevenger and all the rest of them. But I sat in front of Bob Hussack for 20 years. And he always practiced. And he would say to me, if I don't do my basics and a good warm-up today, I will notice it the next day, and the audience will notice it the third day.
I like
and that. I figured if he was doing that after so many years of performing and playing, that's probably a really good role model to follow. And so I really took that to heart. And in my teaching, there's a certain book that I do that my teacher made me go through, and I've probably played it. I do it every day, and it's a scale study book out of Chantal, and it makes you do intervals and scales and arpeggios, and that's what music's made up of.
Yeah,
and it's built in the middle register.
Yeah,
I think the highest note might be a B flat. It might go down to a low G, maybe, but it's more in the middle register, so it makes you play there. And I think that's the most important. You have to do your daily stuff.
Yeah.
And it may not be, all right, I'm warmed up. Nice practice. And that's kind of like what Jake would say too. He says, these warm up pretty quick, but you have to do your daily stuff with good air. And so it's always in my mind about the flow, the kinds of air, they're all the same. I mean, you go back and look through many different warm-up routines, and they all kind of do the same thing. Maybe just a little different twist, and they start a little different. But you do the arpeggios. You have to know your partials. You have to do some long tones. You have to do scales and articulation. You just check the boxes. And the best players that I know of do that. Yeah.
Would you say in your career that your practice has changed a lot?
It's interesting, in the CSO, I probably did almost a similar, not as regimented as Norman Schwarz's routine, I could tell what time it was. And it was 20 after 9 when he got to a certain exit. 8 to 8.
Yeah, well,
But I covered those basics. But as I've gotten reading more, I'm kind of doing more chromatic work than I've ever done before, instead of just doing arpeggios really fast and that flexibility. You have to do that too, but I do a lot more chromatics, and I think it's connected the middle range to the low range to the upper range better. And that's Clark. That's Clark's stuff.
Yep.
You know, and it's kind of written out in the brass gym that Sam Falafian and Patrick Sheridan put out. I got that out the other day, and we went through 3 or 4 of the exercises with a student. And I use a euphonium book because it starts lower, and made them do that. And I said, yeah, this is kind of what you could be doing every day. And scales in our, you have to know that.
Yeah.
So do I do more of that? Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
No, I do. Probably that's my main thing, unless I'm starting to learn a new work or something, But
I love you keep coming back to basics, and it's really refreshing to hear. Even
look at the greatest tennis players.
Yeah, sure.
What did they do before a match? Go out and play a match? No. They stretch. You see them using the bands all the time now.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. They're using these bands, and they're going out and doing all the strokes, hundreds of them.
Yeah.
You wouldn't go out and do a bunch of high C's if you hadn't done something slower and get your footwork underneath you. I mean, it's so similar to, because I do like to watch sports. And I was saying to the students the other day, so when was the last time you watched a basketball game? Oh, no. I said, well, you should watch your own basketball team. Because when they get up to the foul line, that's a little stressful. They're behind 1 point and they have to make it. What do they do? And they went, I don't know. I said, they exhale. So that's another part of my playing that I've changed a great deal. And I'm making sure all my students are doing it, that you are inhaling and then you're exhaling in the time that you want to start playing your next excerpt or solo. And then you inhale in time. Because if
you're doing a practice
start of the, so there's not a stop. But it's kind of written out kind of nicely in a graph in the Gunther Schuller book, where if you and then hold and then start to go, you're stuck. But if you start down here and go, or like a tennis, or exhale when you're bouncing the basketball and shoot it, that's when you inhale. It's very interesting to watch it. So I'm constantly saying, what's your tempo for this excerpt? You have to know what you're going to start at. So then you can breathing and like you're going to jump on that wagon and go and not just kickstart it.
Yeah.
And then, so when you start Brahms 3, people kind of already feel through the screen your tempo because of the way you took a breath.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't go, da, 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 right? You wouldn't do that. Right. So why would you go, da, da, da,
Yeah.
You have to have the same, you have to be in sync with what you're going to play.
Yeah.
So that's something I've added that I hadn't done much of before. I was exhaling. And I like that I'm not a very tall person, so I don't have a lot of leftover air. But some of these kids are really tall. So they're taking air upon kind of stale air. And it's helped them create a little bit better sound and they're not as tight and held.
Yeah. Yeah. One really interesting thing we've learnt in some of the research that's out there is that actually women have 10% more rib mobility than men. So that's one for free for all the female brass players out there, because of late pregnancy, when your torso is full of a baby. You're designed more. Yeah, as you know. So,
yeah. My kids didn't like the Wagner tuba very much.
They're not the only ones.
But it's getting them to realize. I was starting to do something the other day with someone doing some EFT, the tapping, and then I had them tap underneath their arms and make them realize that could move and bend and stretch and take some sips. And they were like, oh. I said, yeah, you have to do everything you can because you're not 6'4".
Yeah.
So
we forget that our lungs.
That's just another form of making them realize that they can, oh, I'm really tight. Oh, well, that's, So I'm trying some not new things, but new for me.
Yeah. Always learning. And I think that's one of the
it's fun.
Amazing signs about such a fantastic teacher, that you're always adapting, always changing, always curious.
Well, the students bring in different issues, right? They're not all the same.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
When they ask you, what's your curriculum? I said, I have 25.
Yeah.
Curriculums.
Yeah.
They're all different, and that keeps life interesting. Some days.
Well, yeah, it's been fantastic. It's been really refreshing to talk to you about all these things and hear some of your insights and your stories.
I didn't ramble on too much, but it's fun.
Yeah. And thanks for giving up your dinner time to meet with us. Yeah. And look forward to, obviously you're a part of the Embouchure project, and we look forward to the future. And
I love sitting there just listening to you all and try to just comprehend some of it and see what I can just let it sink in, because I'm not a doctor. And that's what I always say. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah. Other than mine. Yeah, it's amazing to hear these doctors actually interested in brass players and what we're doing. And we really appreciate your time. And
you're very welcome. Thanks, Frankie.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Embouchure Project podcast with me, Frankie Lacerda. The strength of this project is our network, so please go to the embouchureproject.org to sign up for our mailing list, follow us on Instagram, and join our group on Facebook. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email us at info@theembouchureproject.org. We look forward to hearing from you.